Hello, this video is for my older brother's Christmas present. Names are being redacted throughout the video. About a year ago, we briefly spoke about Scott Galloway, he's a thought leader for a couple of things. He talks about business, about the economy, talks about how the older generations are set up so that the wealth is being transferred to them for young people, etc. So we talked briefly about him. And this year he came out with a new book, Notes on Being a Man. I bought it for my brother for Christmas. Read it. I inserted little note cards into after each chapter with questions that I had for my brother about what his reaction was to the material in that chapter. And then I wrote down my own thoughts about my responses to the chapters and the things that Mr. Galloway says in them. This video is me reading what I wrote down, my responses to the book. In some way, it is a book review, but it's also kind of a self-reflection related to the topics in the book. All of this is from my older brother, so that we can have this asynchronous intellectual discussion about what's in the book. So, let's get into it. Now, in the introduction, Scott Galloway brings up a lot of the topics that he talks about throughout the whole book, right? One thing that surprised me was his language was a little more coarse than I was expecting, which is fine. I just normally when I read memoirs or research books, it's a little bit less coarse in terms of the language that he's using. Not an issue though. Was able to get past it. And first off, I mean the book is Notes on Being a Man. In the introduction, he lays out some of the problems facing young men in our society today. And have I felt those? He talks about, increased sense of loneliness, less college progress for young men, etc. For the details, you can look at his book or some of the other stuff in the Institute of Boys and Men. I have felt it a little. One of my problems is that I know humans have a tendency to gaslight themselves to believe that they have challenges that aren't there, right? But I also have a tendency to gaslight myself the opposite way. And I know that there's a number of people who also do that, where they gaslight themselves into believing that they don't have challenges that they actually do. Which means there's always a question mark for me whenever I attempt to consider if large or problematic trends apply to me. I think I have felt the shift a little bit. At the very least, I felt the pull from the dark side of the manosphere, so to speak. And I've also felt the rejection from the Democratic Party, where that in the book he mentions that on the Democratic Party's website they have a section called "Who We Serve," and young men aren't on that list. And that feels like a rejection to me. It's one of the reasons why I don't align myself with the Democratic Party, is because they don't want me. And I don't want to go where I'm not wanted. So, I felt a little bit of those problems. I know that the issues that he talks about affect those in more marginalized communities as well. Like black young men are affected by this a whole lot more, etc. But I think in general, in terms of like a cultural shift, when I was growing up, I felt like I would never be as good as a girl because I was a guy, right? From a moral perspective, like I would never be morally as valuable, which is frustrating. But anyways, he brings up a stool or a three-pronged explanation as to what masculinity is and should be, and the three legs are protector, provider, procreator. When he describes the stool and the three legs, he almost redefines them to having the strength to protect, the strength to provide, the strength to procreate, and be a good father. The actual implementation can look different. And I think it's here he sums it up. This topic, this concept is summed up when he brings up surplus value, right? As part of masculinity is providing that surplus value. And that's a concept that he continues throughout the book. So more on that later. A couple more things in the introduction. He states that there's no such thing as toxic masculinity, but that is the emperor of all oxymorons. There's cruelty, criminality, bullying, predation, and abuse of power. If you're guilty of any of these things or conflate being male with coarseness and savagery, you are not masculine, you are anti-masculine. I appreciate that. I don't know if I agree to the letter, but I do appreciate that defining masculinity as separate from toxic masculinity, right? There are toxic traits, and they are toxic regardless of whether you're a man or a woman, right? Cruelty is toxic regardless of whether you're a man or a woman. Um, and so a lot of times I think we look at toxic masculinity as something that only men deal with, whereas these toxic human traits are not just men's problem. So I appreciated that. The phrase toxic masculinity has never really sat well with me, so that was helpful. In the education sphere, he brings up the stats that there are a lot less male educators than there are female educators. And I thought a second. I don't know what the stats are where I grew up, or if they're still that way. I had a number of teachers who were men that I really, really liked. My band teachers, my choir teachers, a history teacher that was just phenomenal. Um, so I don't know what the stats are, but I can speak to having male teachers was awesome for me. Not all of them, but having a few that were just solid people helped me to grow up. The final thing I want to respond to in the introduction section, he claims that the 2024 election was supposed to be a referendum on women's rights. It was instead a referendum on failing young men. This can be read a couple different ways, and I'm not super clear on which he's intending. Option one is that men have, yet again, stolen the spotlight from groups of people who are actually struggling, and this is just another example of the patriarchy at work. Option two is that we have ignored actual problems that face young men, and that has consequences we weren't expecting. Based on the rest of the book, I think he means option two. The word supposed to leads a little more on the side of option one. It just to me it implies that the problems facing young men aren't supposed to be problems, right? We're not supposed to worry about them. We're not supposed to do all these things. So I'm not exactly sure what he means. I think it's kind of a mix, because honestly, this is he speaks to this a lot, how this issue is difficult to speak about because there are a lot of problems facing women. There are still problems facing women, and a lot of other marginalized groups. And so how do you speak to the problems facing young men without pretending like those other issues aren't also important to deal with? So I appreciate that he is speaking about it, right? Because there are real problems facing young men. But that doesn't mean that there aren't also problems facing other groups, that we can't have empathy for other groups, right? So I appreciate his effort here, and I understand the cognitive dissonance, so to speak. And this kind of speaks to that. So those are my thoughts on the introduction. Let's go on to chapter 1. Now, the first chapter is on his boyhood, but he starts by talking about the kind of financial business success that he's had. And this is one of the reasons that Scott Galloway is interesting to me, is because he does tend to lean on the more liberal side, on the more democratic side, but he has been very successful. And for a lot of people in those ideological circles, that is kind of contradictory. So I think it's interesting how he starts this book talking about his own success, his own definition of capitalism, etc. And that's something that I'm interested in. So it was interesting to see his take on that. In this section, he also speaks on testosterone. I prefer more of a scientific approach. I mean, he's not a biologist, right? He's not a scientist in that sense, referencing studies and whatnot. But I appreciate how he highlights the potential for both good and bad, right? He talks about how testosterone helps you take risks, it helps you become stronger, etc. And he gives examples of when those are good, and then examples of when those are bad. And so, one thing throughout this book that I like is that he mentions these traits of being a man, these these parts of being a man that can be used for good or can be used for evil. And he doesn't say that, oh, all men are this way because they have that capacity, but that it depends on how you use it. And I appreciate that. One of the things that he says in his Boyhood, he talks, of course, about his parents, and his parents were divorced when he was fairly young. One of his notes is that being a good dad means being a good mother to your children. The best thing you can do for your kids is to love their mother. And to me, this enters the fascinating field of relationship psychology, and particularly what love means between two people. Now, I touched on this a little bit in my question card, but I am fascinated in the concept of what does being good to their mother mean, right? From like an actual action perspective, like what actions are good, what actions are bad. Of course, there's a set of actions that are unequivocally bad, right? Physical abuse, emotional abuse, um, other stuff like that. But there's a lot more nuance when we consider the kind of the ups and downs of relationship dynamics. For example, all relationships have disagreements. Does being good to their mother mean we roll over and give up at the first sign of disagreement? Or on the flip side, do we have a surplus of confidence and bulldoze over their opinions, right? I don't know if it's the outcome, like whose opinion we go with in that disagreement matters as much as how we treat each other during the disagreement. If we have kind of contempt for the other person's stance, regardless of whether or not we bulldoze them or just kind of roll our eyes and move on with our lives, that won't solve the issue, right? If in my relationship, if we go with my wife's ideas all the time, that doesn't mean by itself that I'm treating her well, because it could just as easily mean that I see her as some sort of fragile tyrant who needs to have her way, or else we're not going to have peace, right? And that's not thinking highly of her. I'm very lucky. My wife is how would I put this? Intellectually resilient. She doesn't need me to agree with her all the time, and I don't. And we some of our best conversations are when we are disagreeing, but we're doing it respectfully, right? So I think being good to their mother for a lot of people can mean just kind of rolling over, and I don't think that's an appropriate way to look at it personally. That wouldn't fly to me. That's not respectful. That's reverential in a way that does not acknowledge your partner's humanity, right? If they're perfect, they're not human. So, anyways, this isn't a book about relationship dynamics, so I'll stop there. But those are some of the thoughts that I had. One of the other topics he brings up is the idea of compounding interest. I didn't know that this would come up in this chapter, but I love the concept. Of course, it's huge in the world of finance, but I've seen the implications in my own life so many ways. It's like that over and over again. If I consistently just put in a little bit of effort here and there, my skill, my confidence increases exponentially over time. And eventually I can see the impact of small daily wins with the momentum I have, and that built skill propels me to larger and larger wins. It takes time, of course, but I've seen compounding interest in my own life outside of just the world of finance, partially because I haven't been alive long enough to really take advantage of compounding interest in finance. But I'm getting there. He also has, of course, a section on divorce because his parents were divorced. My parents aren't divorced, so I didn't quite connect with that section as much. But the main lesson I got here is that boys need good role models. So for me, I don't currently have a son of my own, but not being afraid to be a role model for any boys. Yeah, I cover that a little bit more in another chapter as well. So save it for that, and that's chapter 1. In chapter 2, he talks about adolescence, which is an exciting period of time for all of us. One thing that he brings up is body dysmorphia, and this was interesting to me. I don't think I felt much body dysmorphia while I was growing up. Now, don't get me wrong. I would have loved to have been a couple inches taller. It would have been great. But I don't think I ever felt like I didn't belong in my body. It's just, sad about it sometimes. To be fair, I had pretty good genetics aside from height. I've always been able to get results from working out, from eating right. And so it's been pretty ingrained in me that my output in that regard is a direct result of my own actions. If I don't like the way my body looks, it's primarily a habit problem. It's primarily my fault. And then once I've taken care of my habits for a while, I tend to look better. So as far as body dysmorphia, I didn't connect with that quite as much. Um, but that doesn't mean that it's not an issue, right? I've seen some ads for, what is it, like Skims for men, shapewear for men. So I think this body dysmorphia is affecting a lot more people than I expected it to, which is sad. In this chapter as well, he talks about the impact that Boy Scouts had on him. And I was part of Boy Scouts. The male leaders in Boy Scouts and then my youth group at church really did have a positive impact on me. I think it was good for me to have other good men involved in my life. And my dad is phenomenal. Easily had the most positive impact. But part of having other good men in my life, though, was that I was able to understand that there were more ways than one to be a good man. And even if I didn't have to pick any of those ways, I knew that there was a spectrum within which I could be a good man. I didn't have to fit with one specific mold. Looking back now as an adult, um, the sacrifice of those men helped me a lot. I have a job now and family, and I'm still early in my career, and seeing how much time that those youth leaders put in, I respect them more now than I did when I was a youth. That's for sure. Yeah, they're angels. He also, in this section, it seemed like he was unusually focused on sex as a high schooler. I didn't feel that way a whole lot. Of course, for me, there were probably religiously imposed limitations and whatnot. But I also didn't really feel the need as much to be impressive to girls. For a few years, yeah, but like as I started getting older in high school, it didn't really seem as important to me to be impressive. I wanted to be good, regardless of what the girls thought. So this is one aspect that didn't quite connect with me. I didn't really see being impressive as a stepping stone to reproducing. Um, but yeah, it was unusual for me. And then one of the other parts he talks about is he mentions that there's a skill set taught by the upper middle class kids that is just not taught to lower middle class kids. Um, to me, this ushers in the discussion of like how to facilitate class mobility, right? And personally, I think, of course, there's a baseline of resources that we need to have for sure. But above that baseline, I think it's mostly skill acquisition. With these skills that he mentions are taught to upper middle class kids, like you can try again, like don't give up the first time, keep at it, diversify your attempts or whatnot, try with a lot of different things. Um, but like take teaching music, right? It doesn't really matter how much knowledge you give somebody about theory or even specific instrument instruction if they don't have an instrument to play with or if their voice is gone. Once they do have an instrument, though, regardless of how poor quality the instrument may be, the differentiator is a lot more in skill acquisition than instrument quality. If I had a professional grade trumpet, I still wouldn't sound as good as our younger brother would sound on a beginner trumpet. I think it's kind of a similar concept here with class mobility. You need to have something, but once you have that baseline amount, above that, it's mostly skill acquisition, maybe with a few exceptions here or there. So those are some of my thoughts. I'm interested to hear what your thoughts were. Let me know on the questions that I put in the index card. So that's chapter 2. Chapter 3 was all about college. One of the things in college that I didn't really experience was a fraternity. He brings up fraternity hazing as being an overall good thing. I'm not sure where I land on this topic. On the one hand, fraternity hazing can be quite dangerous, right? I think people have died from it. He listed out that there's a myriad of problems for fraternities, but he still thinks it was worth it. And there's research to back that up, that hazing to join a group helps people feel more strongly connected within that group. It highlights kind of a shared experience, a shared suffering that people have gone through. I felt intensely lonely throughout my entire college experience. Would this fraternity hazing have helped? Quite probably. But I don't know if I can condone the particulars, right? Like, I wouldn't have drank to join a fraternity. And that being said, I don't know if I would have joined a fraternity, even if it was available, on our college just because I don't know if I would have understood the benefits while I was there, right? I didn't need a fraternity to get good grades, and that's why I was at college. So I don't know. I don't know if I would have joined. If I had, it probably would have helped me not feel quite as lonely. But that's the past. One of his sections, and then it's going on with college as well. He comes down pretty hard on the side of college being worth it, mainly from the socialization along with the skill acquisition side. Um, I agree, all things considered, maybe a little bit more balanced. College can be worth it, but it depends on how you spend your time at college. I over-index on the skill acquisition side, getting good grades, etc. uh, maybe less worth it now because of the amount of information that we have at our disposals, right? I probably could have gained those same amount of skills now in a similar amount of time, but I don't know. But having a structure to that skill acquisition helped me for sure. Having people tell me what to do. But looking back, I think my college experience probably would have been more worth it if I had spent more time being social. If I hadn't been concerned as much with what I was doing in class, making sure that all my homework assignments were in on time and done well. Um, in fact, I remember going to a few group study sessions and thinking to myself that they weren't that useful because I could study more efficiently by myself. Where that really isn't the purpose of group study sessions, right? So, I don't know. I think college can be worth it, absolutely, but it depends on your behavior during college to make that worth it. All of this kind of wraps up, and he says that relationships are kind of more important than anything else. I agree. That's where we have the most joy. I've spent a lot of time listening to or learning the psychology of relationship dynamics through reading books and listening to podcasts. But it's probably better to actually practice, right? I've talked a bit about how my college experience was maybe less relationally strong, even though I got married and got good grades. I don't think I've done a whole lot of relationship practice outside of our family since I got back from my mission, which is 8 years ago now. So I guess I'm putting it a little bit to work right now in Elders Quorum, but um, relationships are important and you need to practice them. I think you go into that a little bit more in a later chapter as well. One of the last concepts that he talks about, and this kind of paradox blends into the next chapter as well. Um, Early in the chapter, he brings up that the best decision he made was to be a straight white man born in the 1960s. But then he ends the chapter with the statement that getting good at life means working instead of watching other people work. To me, this leads to the topic of like luck versus hard work, which is required for success of any sort. Like, do you need luck or do you need hard work? The place I've landed on is that it's both are necessary, but neither is sufficient for lasting success. People who inherit fortunes can blow them just as easily as they inherited them. People blessed with great genetics can still eat crap and die from obesity. At the same time, people can work hard and hit a wall not of their own making. Outsized success requires outsized luck and outsized work. But of course, to me, that's focused on the financial aspect of success, or maybe the physical fitness aspect of success. For the interpersonal, inner peace aspects of success, I think the scale is weighted a lot more on the hard work side. If I don't have a successful, meaningful relationship with anybody, that's exclusively my problem. The odds where if every single individual you meet is just a jerk, those are incredibly low odds, especially if you meet like 10 people in the course of a month. People are usually good. So if we can't seem to find any good people, that's an issue with us. and it's kind of same with inner peace. If our inner world is dominated by what other people are doing, we have given over control of that inner world to external factors, and we can have joy regardless of what is happening in our lives, right? So in some instances, success, particularly financial, of course, outsized success is a factor of both outsized luck and outsized work. For a lot of what actually makes life worth it, we don't need as much luck. That's my take, of course. That's where I've landed so far. Might change in the future depending on what happens. But yeah, so that's the synopsis of chapter 3 and some of my reactions to what he said. Chapter 4 is all about work. And has a lot of paradoxes, similar to kind of how we ended the chapter 3. The first paradox in this chapter is like, is it a meritocracy or not? And during the beginning of the chapter, he makes it pretty clear that working in the service industry inoculates people from believing in the illusion of meritocracy. The implication is that we don't live in a meritocracy. Later in the chapter, he states that the strongest indicator of future success is perseverance and resilience, implying that it is a meritocracy. I wonder if he's, like, in his mind, he has segmented the population into those born with opportunity, those born without opportunity, and then makes the later statement based on those born with opportunity, right? So, like, perseverance and resilience are differentiators referring to those, like, only among those born with opportunity, but those born without opportunity essentially have no hope. I don't know if that's what he means. But, regardless, while I didn't have access to the California school system that he did, I was born into relative opportunity for sure, especially as, like, we zoom out to encompass more of the world. The implication for me is that my success is largely more determined by my perseverance and resilience. If we, continue with the segmentation of the population, like, my range of possible successes is higher because of how I came into this world, but where I land within that range is based on my choices. That's kind of how I interpret and personalize this paradox. The second paradox is, are rich people nice or not? While he was in the service industry, he mentioned that the nicest people were those that had indicators of wealth, right? Nice cars, nice handbags, all that stuff. In his job at Morgan Stanley, he mentioned that the people with the lucrative jobs were the meanest. And this is a paradox that I see all over the time, on the news, social media, and just talking to people. Personally, and I know, I don't know if you agree. Actually, I don't know if you agree. I don't think you agree with this. But I consider, like, wealth or the lack thereof to have no bearing on somebody's character. Massive wealth leverages the character of the person holding that wealth. All of their flaws will have outsized impact, but the flaw itself is no worse than any of ours. It's like if a plane is off course by 1 degree. Over the course of the flight, the plane will get progressively further from the intended destination, but it's still only 1 degree off. So, next question, of course, is that if since the outsized impact of their character flaw, or since their character flaws have an outsized impact relative to the rest of ours, do we need to have any laws to mitigate against that? We probably do. But we would have to look at the particular flaws and the impact and the details of how to mitigate against each of those. So for this section of TLDR, if we had wealth, would we be any better? The next section, this was a long section, and I had a lot to say because I've been working. Go me. He mentions work as an identity. I felt that for sure. When I left Deloitte, it was like I was leaving behind a part of myself. In fact, I still consider myself part of, like, ex-Deloitte, even though I've been gone for a few months. Is it good? Is it bad? I don't know. I think it depends. The parts of me that are still connected to Deloitte are, like, the high-end, high-achieving, ambitious traits that I don't really want to remove from my identity. The auditor part never really stuck. It's not that strongly ingrained. But, like, the high-performing, high-achieving, I appreciate that. I don't think I'm going to remove that. The next, one of the next sections, he talks about how balance is a myth. If you want to get anywhere, you need to have seasons of being off balance towards that direction. That means trading time and energy for that progress. One of the things I've heard recently is that people who focus on work-life balance are usually mediocre at both. And so it's the trick is not to be balanced all the time, but when you're at work, be focused on work, right? And during different seasons of your life, be focused on what is needed in that season of your life. I'm pretty young, right, relative to the rest of the world. And I'm in the season of my life where there's a lot of work. I need to actually produce value. During other parts of my life, I don't need to focus on other things, right? But the concept of, like, there are all these things that we need to have in mind. But during certain periods, you need to focus on one thing or the other. There's a time to plant, a time to water, time to weed, a time to harvest, etc. So, a couple of the last things. His idea of always feeling like you're out over your skis, kind of pushing the edges of your capacity. I recommend living this. It's a lot more exciting because you're always scared of what comes next. Maybe not scared, but have high anticipation for what comes next. If I'm not stretching my capacity, I'm shrinking, right? Um, it's like the direction you're going is more important than the position you're at. If you're 150 pounds overweight, but you start working out consistently, you're heading in a better direction than the person who's fit, but has decided to start sitting on their couch and eating terribly. So those were some of the concepts and my reactions from what is this, chapter four about work, and let's go on to chapter 5. Chapter 5 is all about health, and I liked this chapter a lot. I with exercise, right? I resonated with a lot of what he said here. Exercise is absolutely one of the highest return activities that I make in my life. Um, so many benefits, of course. Physical health, obvious one. Exercise makes it possible for me to literally do a larger set of activities. I can do more things. Hikes aren't that difficult. I can play with my daughter and your kids more physically in the way that they enjoy. Sometimes I like my daughter will. I'm sitting on the couch. She'll come and like sit on my feet. I'll lift her up with my legs, and she loves that. So do a couple of other kids. But I couldn't do that if I wasn't pushing my body frequently and actually trying to be active. Mentally, exercise is a huge help with regulating my emotions. Frequently, when I'm stressed or overwhelmed, all I need is like a solid, difficult run. It's gotten to the point where if I have a really rough day at work, I go on a run and I feel better after the run. It's like I pound my frustrations into the pavement. Some of my best 5K times have been when I've been angry at my managers, and then the anger kind of transformed into a drive to push myself harder. Best emotional regulator I've ever experienced. And then of course this bleeds into my relationships. If I'm more emotionally regulated, I have more space for grace, to give grace to my wife, right? To hold space for her when she needs more time and more listening. And it's at the point where if I'm kind of off kilter emotionally, my wife will recommend that I go work out or I go on a run. The other day, I was going to bed late, which is bad, I know, because sleep is also important. And I asked my wife, should I sleep in an hour or work out? And she said, well, how long has it been since you worked out? I said, it's been a few days. She's like, go work out. You need it. And I did. The next part of this chapter that I wanted to talk about was his focus on the action orientation. At the end of the chapter, the last sentence of his last note says, believing you're a victim does nothing but destroy agency and make you less likely to take action. I cannot agree more. This is one of the most difficult journeys I've been on, is identifying when I believe I'm a victim and translating that into actually taking action. And I've been on this journey for like 10 years, and I still find myself seeing myself as a victim. For example, just the other day, I forgot to put dinner away, and it stayed out all night. But that's not the story I told myself. When I realized that that dinner had not been put away, it was my wife's fault for not reminding me. Why is it my responsibility anyways? I mean, my wife shouldn't only remind me. Why doesn't she do it every now and then, right? It's not like we have a contract agreement that I'm the one who is supposed to put dinner away. I put my daughter to bed, and then my wife had time to deal with dinner while I was doing that. Eventually, I saw the pathways that my brain was taking and internally took accountability for not putting dinner away. I've known this concept for years, taking accountability and all that stuff, but I still fall into these victimized mental pathways, and I see how it poisons my life if I don't address it quickly. So, having an action orientation is difficult. I don't want to sugarcoat it. It is difficult, but it is worth it. The last part of the chapter that I want to talk about is the social media addiction. He comes down pretty hard against corporations that make money off of us getting addicted to something, whether that's social media or fast food. I agree that our modern world has more opportunities than ever before for us to get addicted to rage, porn, food, drugs, etc. I think sometimes we can focus too much on demonizing the people in charge of the corporations and infantilize the customer. I mean, it sucks that it's so easy to get addicted. The corporations should probably do something about it. But at the same time, it's not their addiction, it's ours. They aren't responsible for what we choose to do. I guess my take on this is kind of downstream from the point about having the action orientation. Believing that we're victims to the social media behemoths does nothing but destroy agency and make us less likely to take action. Going further on this point, believing that we're the victims of the corporations makes it really easy to obscure any self-improvement that we need to do. If I spend too much time on the socials and feel disgusted with myself, I can transfer the source of that disgust from my own actions to the corporations. That's a lot easier to feel than acknowledge that I can improve. If the fault is with other people, I can just tell them how to improve and not have to worry about it. So I kind of agree here. I differ in the focus on the corporations, but I recognize the issue that social media poses in our lives. So that's my take on Chapter 5. Chapter 6 was all about friendships. There are a few concepts that stood out to me. First off, he mentions that friends should be easy. I think this is a mixed bag. I think eventually friendships should get to the point where they're easy, but getting to that point can be pretty difficult. And it's pretty rare for me to get to that point. There's only a few people I can think of who it's easy to be around now. And that's after a lot of time of me feeling like I need to, stressed around them. Not due to any fault of their own. I just tend to be stressed in social situations. So I do agree that friends should be easy, but I don't want to say that friends should be easy all the time even when you're making new friends. So mixed bag there. The next concept he mentions friendship is a muscle, and I agree. I agree. If I don't frequently talk with people or try to be friendly, I find myself becoming a lot more isolated and less capable at conversation. Sometimes my mouth just needs to practice talking a bit, and then I need to practice being a friend. Practicing being a friend is interesting, though. Like, what specific actions do you do to practice being a friend? On first thought, I think just the skill of talking with people, asking about their lives, right? You'll inevitably learn something about their life, and you can remember that for the next time you talk and say, hey, how's that thing about your life going? Ask about their dogs, learn about their sports team, etc. So maybe the skill of friendship is really just prioritizing people over yourself and being interested in their lives. So that's friendship as a muscle, and my reaction to that. The next take is risk in relationships, and the concept of taking risks in a friendship was interesting to me. On reflection, I agree. Friendships and relationships in general only grow when one of the members takes a risk. My relationship with my wife grows when I take a risk and say, hey, I'm not feeling good, or in any sense of the word, I'm feeling lonely, feeling insecure, all that stuff. Even I'm feeling angry, right? Those are the raw discussions that lead us to feeling closer. So, and to me, taking a risk is a signal that the relationship means something more to you, and it gives them an opportunity to respond and say, yes, this relationship also means that much to me as well. The initial risk is, they can reject you immediately, which sucks, but there's a longer term risk where opening yourself up to somebody, they can hurt you a lot more. So even just having friendship is a risk, but friendships don't grow without risks. One of the other topics was the equivalent, that's not the right word, correlation between social networks and mental health. I've encountered a number of studies that suggest pretty strongly that social networks are the common denominator for healthy populations. I've seen my social network prop up my mental health, as small as it is, or as small as my social network is. I was recently getting stressed about some side projects and trying to get them to actually make money. I have a tendency to want to spend more and more time, just kind of sink all of that into those things. That time, of course, if I sink that time into it, it's almost guaranteed to work out, right? Or at least one of the projects will work out. I'm just going to mess with my relationships, my family. So I feel that tension a lot. I feel the tension of spending more time at work versus spending more time with my family. One particular day, my wife and I were going to visit a few friends, and I was feeling that tension. And I told her about it. We got there and had a good time. On the way back, I realized I didn't have that tension anymore. And so this friend, I was able to talk with him about work, and realized that I'll probably be okay. And so my anxiety level had decreased. I don't know if I'd call that like diagnosed anxiety, but my stress decreased. So that was nice. A few of the last points, he mentions quitting friendships. I seem to be the friend that other people quit, or we just kind of lose contact and we mutually don't contact each other. Um, I should probably keep in touch with people better, but maybe I'm too good at quitting friendships. The last point is assertive friendships, being assertive in a friendship. Sometimes we need to push our friendship onto people. Um, Most people are going to be okay with it because you're being friendly. And if they aren't, they'll let you know. I know if somebody was assertively friendly with me, I'd appreciate it. I would probably have a good chuckle about it, but I'd appreciate it. So I should probably be less concerned about being assertively friendly. So those are my thoughts on chapter 6. Let's go to chapter 7. Chapter 7 was all about relationships, and not just friendships, but intimate relationships, right? I've always found this to be fascinating, so I have a lot to say here. I'll try to be brief in my comments. We'll see. Scott states that the best romantic partnerships are synced up on three things: passion, values, and money. I feel pretty fortunate in my life that my sex drive has not been a huge motivator. I've considered the possibility that I'm asexual, given that I seem to care about having sex less than the average man. I rarely make decisions based on whether or not I'll get laid. Even in my marriage, like courting Grace, it was like it just hasn't been a huge factor in my life. And in this, I'm distinctly different from Scott. He talks in a number of his chapters about how like the possibility of having sex was a huge motivator for him, and I just don't connect. It's weird. I don't. I mean, I enjoy it, but maybe that's too much information. But that being said, I'm sure there are some benefits in the passion department that I'm missing out on. I'd maybe just peace with that. I'm fine with it. Um, so I don't know. And this whole like the passion part, do I think it's important? Yes, yes. Vital? Maybe not. So the second leg of the stool, honestly, 2 and 3 are more important to me. Values. I resonate with this the most. I mean, I'm religious, but there's a lot of diversity of values within religion, right? The basic values of charity, integrity, and humility, I think, are not exclusive to religion, but they're important, right? What I found in my marriage is that both my wife and I place a pretty, we place a premium on relationships. We both want to foster relationships that mean a lot to us. We support each other in doing so. This is not particularly focused as a result of our religion, but it definitely helps. And in this, I think I hit the jackpot on alignment of the value of friendships um, and relationships has made our relationship incredible, right? We analyze friendships and then we implement it in our relationship. It's awesome. Would recommend. I also agree with the focus on money. If I like most marriages fail due to money problems, disagreements about money. Now my wife and I don't agree on everything when it comes to money, but we agree on the basics. We don't spend more than we earn, at least over a consistent, or at least over a long enough time horizon. We save, we invest. I would like to save and invest more. My wife would like to use some of that money for fun for now, but as long as we're spending less than we're earning, we'll be okay. We're aligned on that goal. We have come up with a financial system that works for us, and I love it. It balances my tendency to penny pinch and my wife's tendency to maybe have a little bit looser purse strings. This is only possible because we understand the limits of our own tendencies. If my wife didn't understand that the restrictions on money and wanted to run up the value of our credit cards, this wouldn't work. If I didn't understand the value of spending some money now, even if it's not my first thought, this wouldn't work. And now I could talk about this for a long time. But if this is interesting to you, Morgan Housel's The Psychology of Money is a fantastic book. The next topic that I want to bring up is he mentions the secret sauce is kindness. And he mentioned this in the context of dating. I think it absolutely applies to relationships as well. If you're having relationship problems, first try to be kind. I'm saying this to myself. Try to understand where they're coming from. Even though it can feel like you're just doing that all the time, do it some more and it'll be better. Try to be kind first. Next, he mentions laughing. And laughing is such a lubricant for all relationships. Our mom drops the laugh. Our mom laughs at the drop of a hat. Her laugh is infectious. Um, I think I've developed a sense of humor. Sometimes I'm funny, and Grace actually thinks I'm funny. But laughing at myself, I think, is more important. Or sometimes my daughter will do something that could easily be frustrating, and just taking a moment to laugh and be like, I can't believe this is happening. I can't believe this is happening. Um, Makes it more enjoyable. So it takes the edge off of potentially tense situations. I'm interested. So he brings up some marriage statistics and claims that getting married is advantageous economically, and I think that's interesting. Um, I'm not in my 50s, so I don't have that whole timeline to look at. But yeah, I look forward to having more assets in my 50s. So I don't have enough personal data to agree or disagree. I think right now I'm still in the similar boat as a lot of single people. The last concept is that good partners protect you from others, great partners protect you from yourself. I have seen this. Recently, I've come to realize that I'm more of a workaholic than I thought. Not like 80-hour weeks, which are the real workaholics. No, I think 100 or more, or just all waking hours. But about 55 to 60 hours a week is my happy place, which is more than most, I think. When I was in college, I thought I had to study that much to get good grades. I did get good grades. When I was at Deloitte, I thought I had to work that much because it was the Big Four, and I learned a lot, got a lot of quality. But for the first time in a while, I'm in a job that does not require me to work that much. Um, but I'm working that much anyways. Not necessarily all at the job, but doing other things as well. And I finally come to realize I could spend my life working. Um, my wife helps me temper that, where I don't spend all my time working. And that's one way that my wife protects me from myself. There are more, but that's just one example. So that's chapter 7. Let's go on to chapter 8. Chapter 8 is all about fatherhood. And this is fascinating because I'm also a father. One of the concepts that he talks about is that the person you are the person you are before you have kids dies after you have kids. It's like our lives are divided into two distinct people: our pre-fatherhood person and our post-fatherhood person. I don't know if I feel that as distinctively. For me, by the time I had become a father, I had spent 4 or 5 years expecting to become a father. My wife and I had a miscarriage pretty early um, in our married life, like within the first year. And when we found out we were pregnant, I was like, all right, let's be a father. And I was gearing up for that, and we lost it. And then it was 5 years. Maybe it was 4. Maybe it was 4 years. I can't remember the exact number. But during that time, I felt like I was just preparing to become a father, and like I was ready, and it was just waiting for the kid to prove that I was a father. um, so I don't know if I felt as distinctive of a difference. It just kind of felt like the next step. He also mentions how unprepared he felt to be a father. I didn't have quite that sense of feeling unprepared. Um, Now, don't get me wrong. I know that, and there were things that absolutely surprised me about being a father. I was not prepared for every single surprise that happened. However, I understood, like, a lot of the advice that I had been given is like, oh, you won't know what to do during a lot of the time. So, um, I came in with that frame, and I didn't expect myself to know what to do all the time. That helped a lot, where I may not have been prepared for every individual detail that happened, but I was prepared to know that I wouldn't know every single detail that would happen. And so the initial shock of being surprised at something, right, where the my daughter was peeing while I was changing her diaper, or all these all these different things that you talk about. I wasn't prepared for that individually, but the second order effect that a lot of people experience, where they feel guilty for not being prepared, I didn't have that. I was able to be like, oh, well, this is surprising, and then kind of move forward and do what I needed to do without feeling bad about it, which that was huge for me. Um, Also, we had our child about a year after I started my job, so I didn't have a whole lot of time to be in a routine and whatnot. Like a year's not that much when you consider like a career of 40 years. So I don't know what changed because of my job, what changed because of becoming a father, etc. Now, of course, there were changes. One of the most dramatic changes for me happened in how I showed up at my job, and this is why. Before my daughter was born, I was kind of miffed. I was disappointed that my job wasn't using my technical capabilities. I wanted to code, and it didn't let me code. It was sad. Boo-hoo. Um, and I was frustrated with it. I was like, man, this job, they don't appreciate me and all these different things. After I had my daughter, it was like, yeah, well, I have a job, so great. That's I was happy to have a job. Um, it became a lot less about me and my career, and more like what career will help my child grow. So overall, becoming a father accelerated my development, but it wasn't like I just jumped to a different path overnight. The next thing that Scott talks about, or one of the things that he talks about, next thing I'm going to talk about, is that Scott mentions that kids are the best thing that can ruin your life. I think it's kind of related to the above. It's kind of tongue in cheek. Um, where, your old life is ruined when you have kids because the kids are your life now. Um, I think it's great. I think it's like a caterpillar turning into a butterfly. Like the caterpillar's gone. You're not a caterpillar anymore, but like you're a butterfly, and that's so much cooler. Not that like life with kids is easy, it's not. But just as like life is more difficult, there are so many more opportunities for pure joy. I think that's what he's focusing on there. Now his parenting advice. Three things kind of stood out to me. First off, there was the just love them. Simplistic, but it's more applicable, I think, as they become older. And it's both in like the feeling and action of love. Sometimes I turn off my phone. I just observe observe my daughter um, live and play, and that is so joyful to see that. Kind of vague, just experience them, but it works. The next one, of course, is the action of love. Take care of them. Actively go out of your way to spend time with them and make sure that they feel loved. Both, I think, just loving them. Awesome. The next parenting advice, kids are listening. This was something that surprised me, is how much attention my daughter paid to me when I was doing random things that didn't really matter. Having those eyes on me all the time has changed what I do because I don't want her to spend her life on her phone. I don't want her to spend her life not doing things that matter. So it's made me reconsider how I spend my time. Um, the final thing he talks about is that kids don't inherit your interests. Uh, they come with their own. The examples that Scott gives are mostly about teenagers, his teenage kids. My daughter's not a teenager yet, so I imagine that I'll understand this a bit more as time progresses. Right now, she's just interested in everything, whether or not it's my interest. So I think she'll remove some of my interests as she grows older and I become really annoying to her. So I'm excited to see how she grows, though. Excited to get some new interests. But yeah, so that's chapter 8. Let's move on to chapter 9. Chapter 9 is all about manners, how to be respectful. This is difficult because so many different families care about so many different things. It's easy to find kind of the lowest acceptable standard and have that as being okay so that you don't judge other families. But you need to make sure you have standards of some kind. For us, my daughter isn't 3 yet. And so we're currently focusing on just like saying please and thank you. She tends to say like, I want this or I need this. And we make sure to correct that and say, hey, how do you ask? And then what do you say? She's been doing a pretty good job, all things considered, with that. Um, One important note here is that I can't expect my daughter to have manners or live up to a standard that both I and my wife don't live up to. Um, as they grow up, they'll see that dissonance and lose trust, and that the whole relationship and the parent-child relationship is difficult to salvage after that. Now, when you mess up, because of course we will, we need to own it as well. That's an important part. None of us will be perfect ever, even with our own standards. So instead of lowering the standards, um, teach by example. I guess live with self-compassion and apologize when you don't live up to them. That's what I'm planning on doing. I know I only have a 2-year-old right now, so but that's what Scott and the other parenting literature says. So we'll see how it works out for me. About 10 to 15 years. So that's manners. I thought it was interesting chapter. It was kind of short, but it's important to teach to have a code of conduct. And every families will be a little bit different. So on to chapter 10. This chapter is kind of his final thoughts. He rambles a bit, goes all over the place. A couple of things that stuck out to me was when he talked about the draw for more of anything. I felt it. Sometimes the desire for more leads me to neglect my family, which is a problem, right? Fame, I mean, not so much for fame. Sometimes I think it'd be nice, but then I think about the logistics. I'd rather not people know me. So, um, in my current stage of life, right, I am working a lot because that's my current stage of life. That's what Scott did when he was young. Um, so I think a lot of people with resources, when they look back on their life, they're like, "Oh, I should have spent more time with my family." But sometimes they don't realize that the only what makes it possible for them to look back and say that is the fact that they have the resources now, and they forget what it's like not to, you know. So I don't know if my the number that I'm gonna hit will be at Scott's level or below, probably below. But I want financial stability. It's just I need to make sure that doesn't translate into more endlessly, right? So it's a fun experiment. Another concept from this chapter, and I think throughout the whole book, is just give more than you take. Add surplus value. Um, in the business world, adding value is a buzzword, and we forget the concept behind it and the power of that concept. So, um, as during the times that I've tried to add value, I've improved. Right, my job's been better. People around me have trusted me more. So all things considered, I think that's a good idea to end on. Focus on what you can give instead of on what you can get. Then he ends the book with a letter to his sons. The content itself is not too different from what we read in the book. Um, but what would you write in a letter to your children? What lessons would you want to pass down? What would you want them to know, and how would you want them to remember you? I don't know what I would write in a letter to my daughter yet. Um, Personally, I don't know if I've had enough lessons like crystallize. I mean, I've been interested in reading wisdom literature for a long time, um, but I don't think I've experienced enough to really add my own oomph behind it, if that makes sense. To add, I don't know if I've lived enough and lived the lessons enough to have the character behind the lessons themselves, right? And I think I need to live them a little bit more, experience them. And the letter I write is going to be for her, and I don't think I'll read it here. So, but it's an interesting concept, writing letters to your past self, your future self, and your posterity. So I'd recommend it. All in all, notes on being a man. More of a memoir, I think, than a social. Notes on being a man. More of a memoir than a social commentary, which I think is interesting. I think in his position, it's probably the best voice he can add to the conversation. Um, my experience being a man has been a little bit different, but in a lot of ways it's been similar. Where I've needed good guardrails from good examples and good relationship. Um, but yeah. So hope you liked it, and let me know what your thoughts are.